What's going on, everybody? Welcome back into the Fantasy Football Fellas YouTube channel. My name is Lucas Wenzel, and today we are talking about 8 must-start players in Week 9 of the NFL season. It is honestly a disgusting week. So if you have a start-sit question that you need help answering, there's probably a lot of them. You can leave it down in the comments section below, but my one rule is that if you leave a question, help somebody else out, answer their question. We want to be a community that helps each other win their leagues. So if you leave a question, answer a question. Before we dive in, make sure you subscribe here on the YouTube channel. Make sure those notifications are turned on as well so you don't miss out on any of the content we are posting every single day. Whether it's a video like this, a podcast, short form content, there is something coming out every single day. So turn on those notifications so you don't miss out on any of those. Without further ado though, 2 players, quarterback, wide receiver, running back, tight ends, 2 at each position. Let's dive on in with the quarterbacks first. Dak Prescott is our first start of the week. He takes on the Philadelphia Eagles this week. And if we're being honest, quarterback is pretty thin this week. Trevor Lawrence, Jared Goff both on bye. You have Kirk Cousins now, who's out for the rest of the year. You have Deshaun Watson, who's still not sure if he's going to play in Week 9. It's getting pretty thin. But Dak Prescott remains, I think, a phenomenal option in Week 9. He's locked in as a top 10 quarterback for me this week, and you just have to love the matchup with the Eagles, right? Dak doesn't mind playing the Eagles. If you remember Christmas Eve last year, Cowboys beat the Eagles 40-34. Plenty of fireworks in that game. Dak went 27-35 for 347 and 3 in that game. He's actually tossed 3+ touchdowns in each of his last 3 games against the Eagles as well. And now you look at this year, the Eagles are struggling against the pass. The 4th most fantasy points per game allowed to quarterbacks, the 6th most passing yards allowed per game, that is. The 3rd most passing touchdowns allowed this year. So this is a great spot for Dak. I am firing him up with pure confidence this week. Very gung-ho on starting him. He is our first start of the week for Week 9. Let's move on to our second quarterback, though. Derek Carr of the New Orleans Saints takes on the Chicago Bears at home this week. And what if I told you that Derek Carr has thrown the ball 132 times over the last 3 weeks? Over the last 3 weeks, only Jared Goff has attempted more pass attempts during that stretch with 134. Derek Carr has low-key been balling over the last 3 weeks. It hasn't looked good, but it's produced fantasy results. 353-1 in Week 6. That was 17.3 fantasy points. That was a quarterback 10 on the week. 301-1 in Week 7, 18.4. That was a quarterback 9. 310-2 in Week 8, 18.32 fantasy points. That was a quarterback 13. So he's been putting up top 13 quarterback numbers over the last 3 weeks, And again, where quarterback is thin this week, Derek Carr kind of becomes this top 10, certainly top 12 option. And you get Chicago at home, who they've been a great matchup to target for quarterbacks this year. They've allowed a quarterback to score 18+ in all but 2 games this year. They've allowed a quarterback to score 20+ in all but 3 games this year. So to no surprise then, Chicago, they're giving up the 3rd most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks this year. This is a great spot for Derek Carr. I have him ranked as a top 10 option this week. He comes in as a quarterback 11 in our consensus ranking. So if you need a guy, if you're a Kirk Cousins manager or have Trevor Lawrence on bye, Deshaun Watson might not play, Derek Carr might be your best streaming option in Week 9. I would be willing to fire him up with relative confidence this week. Let's move on to the running back position, though. First running back, Jonathan Taylor of the Indianapolis Colts at the Carolina Panthers. Now, before you tell me, Lucas, this is such an obvious start. Let me clear up two things. First, I named Breece Hall a start of the week last week, saying that he would go for 20+ fantasy points. This is a similar spot, and wouldn't you know Breece went for 20+ last week. So I'm saying a big week is in store for Jonathan Taylor. I know he's coming into this week nicked up. That's another reason why you might have a few more question marks. He hasn't been on the practice report as of this recording. Something to keep an eye on, but my guess is that he's going to be full go on Sunday. I wouldn't worry about it. But secondly, Jonathan Taylor hasn't been playing like a must-start since his return. Now, obviously, he was on a snap count, 4.4 fantasy points in his first week, 11.5 in his second week, still on a bit of a pitch count there. Then 21 fantasy points, but last week he only scored 10.7. Albeit during that stretch, there's 3 top 24 finishes in there, but Jonathan Taylor's a top 12 guy. He's not a top 24 guy. You shouldn't be satisfied with that. So that's the context we need to enter in with here, because I think there's another 20-plus point game coming for Jonathan Taylor this week. The Panthers are a matchup I want to target every single week for my running backs, unless if you're the Houston Texans and just can't figure your run game out. The Panthers, they're second in fantasy points per game allowed to running backs. Second most rushing yards allowed. Second in yards per carry allowed at 5 yards per carry. In Carolina, they are giving up 1.7 rushing touchdowns per game to running backs this year. Yes, that is the most in the league. I'm all in on JT this week. He's a top 5 play across the board for all three of us fellas, and he should be treated as such in your lineups this week. Please start him with confidence. Do not question it. There is a big, big week coming for Jonathan Taylor in week 9. Second running back start of the week, Kareem Hunt at home against the Arizona Cardinals. And just like last week, I give you this obvious one that I preach with a lot of confidence, and now I'm going to give you a little bit more of a fringy guy, and that's Kareem Hunt. Let's start with this. Kareem Hunt, he's actually been quietly productive over the last 3 weeks. 16 fantasy points in week 6, 15 in week 7, 13.7 in week 8. He was a running back 16 or better in all 3 of those games. He scored 4 touchdowns during that stretch as well. That's really helped boost his numbers. And all that production, keep in mind, was on 37% or less of the snaps. That's fairly significant. And now you love the matchup with the Arizona Cardinals. We saw Gus Edwards absolutely run all over them last week, a start of the week last week. Third most fantasy points per game allowed to running backs this year. Top 8 of the Cardinals are in both rushing yards and yards per carry allowed to the running back position. But now there is a question mark of Jerome Ford. How does he factor in? Obviously, he's been dealing with a high ankle injury. He did play limited snaps in week 8 after sustaining that high ankle sprain in week 7. Ford has been limited in practice all week. That's to no surprise. With a high ankle sprain, you shouldn't be playing the week after you sustain it. But with how bad this Cardinals defense is and with how run-centric this Browns offense is, I'm willing to still fire up Kareem Hunt this week as a low-end running back too. I know Jerome Ford may potentially be taking snaps as well. But I think I'm willing to fire up Kareem Hunt this week just with how thin it is at the running back position, with how great the matchup is, with the production that we've been seeing. Yeah, I'd fire up Kareem Hunt as a low-end running back too this week in your lineups. Let's move on to the wide receivers now. Garrett Wilson of the New York Jets at home against the Los Angeles Chargers. And now it hasn't been as doom and gloom, my goodness, without Aaron Rodgers. But that's largely because Zach Wilson is just hyper-targeting the crap out of him. 12-plus targets in 3 of the last 4 games. He's had 7-plus receptions in each of those 3 games. And I love this stat from Michael Florio over at NFL Fantasy. Garrett Wilson has been the first read on a league-high 46% of the team's pass attempts this year. That is an astounding number, which is great news for Garrett Wilson. So the usage, my goodness, I cannot spit words out today. The usage is most definitely there. And the matchup is as well. The Chargers are giving up the 3rd most fantasy points per game to wide receivers this year. They're allowing 15.1 yards per reception. That is the 2nd most in the league. And that checks out because the Chargers, they are allowing the most receiving yards per game to wide receivers this year. So for me, it's an all systems go on Garrett Wilson. He'll get the volume. He has the matchup. And in a game where the Chargers certainly won't waste time putting up points, the Jets are going to have to fire back. And I think Garrett Wilson is going to be a key part of that this week. Fire him up with confidence as a wide receiver 2 in your lineups this week. Next wide receiver we should talk about, Josh Downs of the Indianapolis Colts. Another Colt gets in here, taking on the Carolina Panthers on the road. This man has been on fire. He needs to be an every week starter at this point, if you ask me. Since week 3, Josh Downs, he's been the wide receiver 14 in PPR formats. He scored 13-plus fantasy points in 5 of those 6 games. He's outscored guys like Chris Olave, Devonta Smith, even his teammate Michael Pittman Jr., just to name a few guys that he's been outperforming. So based on that alone, Josh Downs should be in your lineups. And now I understand if you also look at the matchup with Carolina and you're like, I don't know, Lucas. You said starting Nico Collins last week against the Panthers. How'd that turn out? Here's what's keeping my optimism up for Josh Downs this week, though, and to keep your optimism up as well. I did a little bit of a deep dive on the Carolina Panthers run defense. This is Carolina Panthers defensive tendencies, The Panthers, they run zone 85% of the time, which is actually the 3rd highest rate in the league. And Josh Downs, he leads all Colts wide receivers in fantasy points versus zone coverage, target share versus zone coverage, or targets per route run, in zone coverage, and yards per route run versus zone coverage. Josh Downs is the Colts' main option against zone coverage. So I'm going to go ahead and fire up Josh Downs as a strong flex option this week. He's my wide receiver 27. I think he could be in for another solid day against Carolina, another solid 12, 13, 14-point fantasy day. I would fire him up this week against the Carolina Panthers. All right, let's bring it home with the tight ends now. Dalton Kincaid is our first tight end start of the week, taking on the Cincinnati Bengals. And as long as Dawson Knox is out, Dalton Kincaid should 100% be finding your lineups. No questions asked. He has been phenomenal the last 2 weeks. 8 for 75 in week 7, 15.5 fantasy points. That was a tight end 7. 5 for 65 and 1 in week 8. 17.5 fantasy points. That was a tight end 8. Somehow that was only the tight end 8. That's crazy to me. Tight ends have been on fire the last 2 weeks. But anyways, George Kittle. Hey, another start of the week last week. I told you to fire him up. Smash start against Cincinnati. Have no concerns, no doubts. What did he do? 9 for 149. 23.9 fantasy points, a tight end 2 on the week. And Cincinnati now on the season, they've overtaken Denver as the most fantasy points per game allowed to tight ends this year. 4th most receiving yards and the 2nd highest catch rate as well to the tight end position Cincinnati is allowing. So we're going to go right back to the well this week. What will likely be high chance of being a shootout. 48 points is the 2nd highest projected point total this week, outside of the game in Germany between Miami and Kansas City. But I'm firing Dalton Kincaid. He's a top 5 play for all 3 of us fellas this week. He should absolutely be locked and loaded into your lineups. You can expect a big week from him against the Cincinnati Bengals. Last tight end we got to talk about here. I hate to do it, but Kyle Pitts. Kyle Pitts is my second tight end start of the week, and I hate trusting Arthur Smith. I literally said it last week when I made Drake London a start of the week. And he only puts up 10 fantasy points, albeit there's an injury in there, but I digress. It wasn't looking too good. So I cannot believe I am going to rely on Arthur Smith once again. But this just feels like a Kyle Pitts game against the Minnesota Vikings. Perhaps an upgrade to Taylor Heineke at quarterback. The secondary of Minnesota can definitely be taken advantage of. They're allowing the 11th most fantasy points to tight ends this year. I'm actually more interested in Minnesota's defensive coverage scheme, though. The Vikings, they run zone coverage 78% of the time. That is the 10th highest. And of all tight ends, Pitts has actually drawn the 4th most targets against zone coverage this year. But you want to know what his catch rate is? His catch rate is only 55.6%. That is absolutely terrible. Not even 60%. So I'm willing to bet this passing attack improves with Taylor Heineke. Drake London, as of this recording, he hasn't practiced yet this week. We'll see what the Friday injury report brings, but he hasn't practiced yet this week. And this is definitely a matchup Kyle Pitts can take advantage of against Minnesota Vikings. Their corners are small. Only Caleb Evans is over 6 foot. And you got a 6'4" behemoth and Kyle Pitts running around the field, who may be potentially the number 1 option for this Atlanta Falcons offense this week. So yeah, screw it. Kyle Pitts, start of the week. Fire him up. You can hate me later because, as I said at the top, I can't believe I'm trusting Arthur Smith. I hate trusting Arthur Smith, but everything is right there for Kyle Pitts to have a great week for fantasy football. That is it. That's all I have for you. 8 must-start players in fantasy football this week. Again, if you have a start-sit question on kind of a gross week for start-sits, you can leave it down in the comment section below. But if you leave a comment, remember to respond to a comment as well. We want to help each other out here on this channel. And if you're not subscribed already, make sure you are. Turn on those notifications so you can be alerted when all of our new episodes are up. You won't miss a beat if that notification bell is turned on. We're grateful for your support here at the Fantasy Football Fellas. Until next time, we'll be back next week with a waiver wire video on Monday, podcast on Tuesday, and shorts all the way up until then. We'll see you then. Stay safe. Deuces. Oh, I hit my microphone on that. Deuces.